can top that. Thank you, guys. Y'all sound great. Didn't the choir and the music sound great today? It's a great Easter. You know, I must say, just an internal story. I'll tell you what's happening with me. Every Easter I come up on it, I know it's supposed to be a great talk. It's supposed to be like the talk of talks. And I usually have zip, nada. I remember the second year I was a minister, I was sitting on the front row, and the woman sitting next to me, I leaned over, it was like, I had 2 minutes before I got up, and I said, what do you think I should talk about? But I got something today, so hold on. Today, I want to talk about vulnerability. I was watching Brené Brown, many of you have seen her on a TED Talk about vulnerability. Now, Brené's not really talking about vulnerability in the way that we often think about it. And she explains this very clearly because she says most of us couple vulnerability with a painful thought. Because we have been vulnerable and then something bad has happened, and so we think of vulnerability as the last thing we want to do. It's the courageous thing for you to do, but the last thing I would like to do, right? And the reason is we have these accumulations of shames and defeats that came right after we were vulnerable, and so when we feel ourselves moving toward vulnerability, we tend to try to shy away from it so we won't have that secondary experience come afterwards. But there's also a cost to that. And the cost is really quite large. Actually, the cost is that if you don't risk, you don't gain. Right? So if you don't go up to the woman in the bar and say, where are you from? Nothing's going to happen. Right? How many of us have had to do that? Have had to be the one? And of course, there's some chance you're going to leave with your tail between your legs, and nothing is going to happen. But you know nothing will happen if you don't. Right? If you don't give it a shot, you'll never get there. And that's the form of vulnerability she's talking about. Where you take yourself and put yourself in a vulnerable position so that you can have an experience worthy of you as a human being. So vulnerability has to become one of our common experiences if we're really going to be fully who we intend to be. And there's no getting around it. There's no easy way. There's no absolute guarantee that you're going to be successful somewhere every time. If you look at a little kid trying to learn to walk, I suppose they feel vulnerable when they first stand up. It's why they reach for your hand. But at some point they let go. And they take the step. And right down they go. But they get up. We're wired to get up. We're wired to rise up. We're also wired to take chances and to become bigger, better versions of ourselves throughout our whole life. And the problem with us, if we're not careful, is that we will hide behind this sense of security, living in a less vulnerable world, and we won't be all that we can be. Now, since this is Easter, I think we should relate it to the Easter story, don't you? Jesus comes into Jerusalem last week when we did the Palm Fronds. We read the story about Jesus comes into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. Now, that is contrasted with a way that a warrior king would come into Jerusalem riding on a horse. So already we're talking about Jesus demonstrating this act of vulnerability, this act of humility or quietude or really vulnerability is about all you can say. He's coming in not as a warrior king, but as a king of peace. Now, where he's coming into is Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is occupied by the Roman legions. And at that time, they usually build up their soldiers, just in case those pesky Jews start to rebel again. So they're really on edge anyway. And Jesus comes in, and all the whole story is that Jesus is like something really special, and some of the people are saying, oh, he is the Messiah. Now, if you're a Roman occupier of Palestine, you don't want to hear about any Messiah, except maybe in the distant future, certainly not in your city on Passover, the high holy day of the Jews. You don't want that. So you would like to get rid of this guy. Now, Jesus, being a relatively smart guy, would have figured this out long before he got there. Right? It's like, talk about taking a chance. I think what we see here, though, in this story is a meta message that we can take that goes beyond Jesus. And the meta message could be this. In the Bible, in Christianity all around, we always hear of Jesus as the Son of God. Often Jesus is the only Son of God. That this is a very, 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 very special being of which there is only one, or at least if there are more than one, he is the best of the best. And God loves him from the get-go. This is the person that goes to the cross. This is what happens to God's Son as he goes to the cross. Now, in Christianity, many times this story has been taken to make you feel as though you owe Jesus a debt of gratitude. You may take that or not, but you can take this message from it, that one of the things about vulnerability, if you're not vulnerable, you do not know empathy. You cannot know empathy if you never have touched into that vulnerability which the person who is suffering has. It's just not, it's not in your wheelhouse. You just don't have it. It's not there. And even if you have been suffered and have had the pain or the shame that another is experiencing, you can't connect with them if you can't connect with your own vulnerability. It's part of the equation. So we have the Son of God, we have essentially God's human representative, God represented in the human form, who's now experiencing the shaming and the paining to the best of the Roman Empire's ability. They're taking him down as strong and as hard as they can. And the pain of crucifixion you've probably seen very well witnessed in the TV shows and movies. But the other thing about crucifixion was that it was a shaming to the highest degree possible. Nudity, beating him up, and on top of this, Jesus' best friends all leave him alone in his hour of need. Flee like there was no getting out of town fast enough. This is the condition that God, in this story, is experiencing. In this story, there is this vulnerability of God to experience pain and the pangs of shame. Why I bring this up is that I think for many of us, we feel as though, or maybe I'm just speaking from my point of view, that essentially the divine is a relatively indifferent. And I believe there's an aspect of indifference to the divine as well. I don't think the divine is holding any grudge against me about anything I've said about him or my mother, really. And so I think this indifference, it might be one true aspect. It's like, I don't think your faults are held against you. I think they hold themselves against you. So you don't have to worry about God wanting to punish you. I think we just get punished by the way we turn out, the way as far as we have to progress. That's the outcome of our progression. It is demonstrated in our life, and some of it's pleasant, some of it's unpleasant. All that aside, I do think there's something really deep here to see in this vulnerability. that in the vulnerability of God experiencing this, then you have the sense from this story that the divine is with you in your suffering. That the divine holds you, is willing to be in a place of vulnerability to have that deep and persistent, empathetic, loving, compassionate connection with you in your life as it is. You imperfect, you as a failure, you as a shamed person, you as a loser. Of course God's with you in your winnings too, okay, but you don't have to worry about that. Not leaving you just because you did well. But you in your suffering, there is the divine right next to you. Because the divine has empathy. And the empathy came from vulnerability. That we have an image of the divine being loving and empathetic with you because it has known what it is to suffer. It's a pretty cool story, right? So Jesus comes into Jerusalem riding on a donkey, humble as a king can be, and he gets taken down to the bottom. And yet, the reason we're here on Easter is that's not the end of the story. And the truth is, it's not the end of your story either. If you have been down or have lost or in the process of going down or losing or have already reached that bottom, it's not the end of the story. It never is. It is the beginning of something new. It is to go down, to come back up renewed. It is the phoenix going into the fire to come out a new bird. This is the whole story, is not that Jesus went to Jerusalem and he suffered and therefore he has empathy. Half the story. The other side is he arises and he leads us in this example of how to be victorious and willing to come back out of the tomb and go for it. We can be defeated. And many of us have, not just going to make a blanket statement, all of us have been defeated. Have we not? Have we not all failed? Have we not all been shamed by somebody? Have we not just shamed ourselves, right? Does anybody in this room go shame-free? I mean, you gotta, if you do, write me a script. I want some of that medicine. I like the idea of being shame-free, but I have some things, right? I wouldn't want to tell you. That's the beauty of not having question and answers after the service. We have all been shamed by external and by internal voices. We have all suffered pains. We have all won, but we also have all lost. But that's not the end of us, and all of us standing here are proof that that's not the end of it. We are going to rise up, and if wherever you are right now, as Anna said at the beginning, every crucifixion has its resurrection. We just have to keep opening to the possibilities and stepping through when they come, which will require us to be vulnerable again, or we will still be on our backs. When you rise up on your feet, now you're vulnerable again. I watch enough MMA to know that's true, really. This is the way it works. We must get up. If you're down, at some point you must stand up. And sometimes you have to rest there. Sometimes you just are holding on. That's all there is. That's all you can do. But at some point, it comes to you. More life. The next expression. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't die. I think this is part of the reason we talk so often about you're not your body. Well, not only your body, for sure. You're not only your body. At some point, this thing will stop breathing, and you will be moving on. But it's good to know in life that you have fallen down enough and gotten up enough that when that fateful day approaches, you go, I've been here before. This ain't the end. This is just the way it goes. First you go down, and then you come up. First they take you to the cross, and then you come out of the tomb. First you lose, and then you win. Don't worry about it. I know this story. I have lived this story. And this is why being vulnerable to life and continuing to do this adds so much to the end of your life as well. Because you got the game. There is no losing. There's just stopping for a moment. Setbacks. And then we rise up. The word courage comes from the French, I think, the French word for the heart, courage, right? And what that means in its original statement, I was told, is this, is that to tell your story wholeheartedly. To be yourself, in other words, in public, wholeheartedly. You can't be telling somebody else's story, so you have to be authentic. You have to be yourself. Being someone else is not the solution to your losses. It does not make your life safer either. But even though it may seem like if I was just like Jane over there, everything would be okay. Well, no, not unless you happen to be Jane. Right? Look around the room. There's actually no face. I don't see one face that looks like another one here. So you were given this face to use it in your life as you, not as somebody else. So authenticity. We need to be clear. Also, in my experience, we also need to be clear that every face we're looking at is vulnerable the moment they're looking at you. They too are expressing courage just by showing up. And so this tendency to see them as other and separate, this tendency to criticize, this tendency to attack or to denigrate another, this tendency is a tendency not to see the truth that we're all vulnerable. That even those on the other side are vulnerable. Maybe the most dangerous thing you could do is to wear light blue in a dark blue stadium like Cameron Indoor. But we're not facing severe danger here on average in this country. But because we are unused to being deeply vulnerable, and so much of our experience comes from the fear of scarcity, and I'll come back to that, we are afraid. We're afraid of other people right now. I know lots of people who are afraid that the world's about to fall apart, right? So the question they ask themselves is, what should I be afraid of? And who should I blame? Right? Anybody here innocent on that one? What should I be afraid of and who should I blame? And this is a whole beginning of the whole cycle of fear that there's not enough or I'm not enough. So I need to be afraid, or the world is a dangerous place, and obviously somebody else is doing it to me in some way. Our job is, as unfolding human beings, is to embrace the vulnerability of being alive. And that this thing that whatever this story that we make up that we need to fear, we need to be careful and be really clear and alert to that. That we might be just spinning a story here of what we need to be afraid and who really is at fault here. Now on the other side, there's the side where we take the blame ourselves. Out of I'm not enough. Out of I'm not good enough. Or I'm unlovable. Or something like that. This is another form of fear of scarcity, the scarcity that you're not enough. And when we do this, I'm not enough, and we take the blame on, I think we cripple ourselves. Because we shut down our capacity to expand because we have defined ourselves now as not enough, and we have blamed ourselves and have taken the juice out of the system. We are not vibrant enough when we are living in its shame and blame, even of our own making. So it's important for us to not get caught in that cycle either, that other side of the not enough. Not enough in the world, not enough in here. Neither one is true. Both of them lead to a fearful state, which helps, encourages us, almost demands us to try to be invulnerable in life. Our job is to expand and be all that we can be. It cannot be done if we're not vulnerable, and therefore this fear is the really thing, as Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, right? Do not be victims of that. So his cousin, Theodore, wrote something. He wrote something called The Man in the Arena. And it goes like this. It is not the critic, and I dare say it's not the internal critic, nor the external critic, little editorial here. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Now, Brené Brown was talking about vulnerability, and when she was talking about it at one of her lectures, she was being interviewed by the people who were going to do American Sign Language and interpret her talk before she went on stage. And so she said, they said, what words are you going to be using that we really need to get down before you speak? And she says, well, I'm Brené Brown. I talk about vulnerability. And they go, okay, vulnerability. She said, what does that look like? She says, well, this is our sign for vulnerability. She says, what does that stand for? It says, weak in the knees. She said, no, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. She said, what's the other sign you have for it? She went like this. Open-hearted. Open-hearted. Now, so far you might have been thinking that when I was talking really about accomplishing things in the world and accomplishing things among people and becoming, the next Steve Jobs or Anna Quintana. And but there's another side to it as well. And this, I think, is as frightening for me as anything I've ever done, which is to be open-hearted in relationship. Is it not? To be this. To say it and to be it. Here I am, undefended. And in this way. Have you ever been around someone who's undefended? It doesn't always happen with me, but often I come into undefended state also. Right? Here I am. Here you are. What is separating us in this country today? The defended state, the accusatory state, the I'm better, I'm separate, I'm not you state. What heals this world that we're in? That. Jesus on a donkey, Jesus on the cross. That. You, open-hearted, honest and kind and empathetic with your neighbor. That you know your neighbor close to you or the neighbor distant. That is vulnerability. That is what the world is lacking. That is what's kept us from loving our neighbor as ourselves. Maybe we are loving them as ourselves, because when you close your heart here, you close your heart everywhere. It's hard to be like open-hearted to yourself, kind and generous to you and your faults, when you have been closed. But when you're open, you stand open to everyone, including yourself. But we who are on the spiritual path are not on the spiritual path so that we can be invulnerable to life. We are here to open so that life might be expressed through us in greater capacity. And it doesn't mean you will not be hurt or shamed. And it doesn't mean it won't get to you at times. But it does mean, if you never do this, you're cut off from the world, you're cut off from yourself. You're cut off from the sense of the divine around you, you're cut off from the peace that passes understanding. There is almost like in weightlifting, no pain, no gain. No vulnerability, at least, no gain. Courage, the heart, courage. So that you tell your story with your whole heart. And your story is that you are a child of the loving God who has empathy with you and you have empathy with others. This is our story. Let us pray. In our hearts, there is a tender one who suffers when we are criticized. And we may be carrying that suffering from the early days of our lives right to the very end. This little one inside also carries shame if it's ever been shamed, if he or she has ever been told they were not enough, has often carried that story as well. It becomes our job to reparent this little one, to do what could have but did not happen when we were little. So I ask you in this moment to find this little one and to give it your love. Give him or her your love. Let them feel this love that is yours. And you become the new parent for the old you. This one needs your love, needs your empathy and understanding, your compassion. Now, strangely enough, every face you see has the same story that you have to some degree. Has that same need to be loved and to be approved, to be forgiven, and to be recognized. This is how we can love. To see them, to love them as they are without changing them or making them different or criticizing them. Let me read you a poem from Hafiz. It is as though God is speaking to you. Someone put you on a slave block, and the unreal bought you. Now I keep coming to your owner, saying, this one is mine. You often overhear us talking, and this can make your heart leap with excitement. Don't worry, I will not let your sadness possess you. I will gladly borrow all the gold I need to get you back. Let us see if we can feel the divine and its love and compassion in this moment, buying us back. And let us buy ourselves back. And let us buy our neighbors back, our children and our spouses, our strangers and our enemies. Let us buy them back. And so it is. Amen.